Intercept in math means exactly the same thing that it does in English. It's the point where two things cross each other. So when we're talking about lines and their graphs, there are two specific intercepts that we're interested in. The y-intercept is the point where the line crosses the y-axis, and the x-intercept is the point where it crosses the x-axis. Now, in general, the intercepts are something that we'll have to calculate individually for a given line, but there are two important facts that hold for every case. If you look at the point on the y-coordinate, the y-coordinate of the point will vary depending on how high or low the line is. But if the point is on the y-axis, then we know its x-coordinate has to be 0. Similarly, the x-coordinate of the x-intercept is going to vary, but to be on the x-axis, its y-coordinate will have to be 0. Now, these two facts are going to be the starting point for our methods for actually calculating the intercepts. So let's look at how we do that, right? I've got an example here. I want to calculate the intercepts of this equation. So to find the x-intercept, remember what we talked about in the previous slide. The y-coordinate of the x-intercept is always going to be 0, right? So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start by letting y equal 0, and I'm going to substitute that into the equation here, and it becomes negative 3x plus 5 times 0 equals 30. And all I have to do now is solve this for x. The 5 times 0 part, that's just 0. So this becomes negative 3x equals 30. And if we divide both sides by negative 3, we get x equals negative 10. All right, so let's hold on to that for just a second and talk about the y-intercept. To find the y-intercept, we're going to do a very similar thing. Again, if you remember the previous discussion there, the x-coordinate of the y-intercept is always going to be 0. So I'm going to do really exactly the same thing, but in reverse. I'm going to substitute 0 into the equation for x and solve the equation that I get for y. All right, well, again, this part just 0 just goes away. We're left with 5y equals 30. Divide both sides by 5, and we get y equals 6. All right, so all the calculations are done. All right, and now the question is, what's the answer? And I really want to talk about this very specifically because this is a point where students often get into trouble. They look at the situation and they say, well, I got an x number and I got a y number, and they try to put the two of them together and say that's the final answer, but that's not the answer. Remember, the question asks for intercepts. First intercepts plural, so we need 2 points here, and that's just 1. And more important, that point is not on either of the two axes. So it can't possibly be either the x-intercept or the y-intercept. All right, so to see what the correct answer is, go back to the beginning. On the x-intercept side, I started by saying let y equals 0, and I solve for x. All right, so the coordinates of the x-intercept are negative 10, comma 0. Then jump over to the y-intercept side. I started by saying that x equals 0, and we solved for the corresponding y value. So I'm going to put those points together, and 0, comma 6 is going to be the y-intercept. 2 points, exactly like we've expected. So the next lecture, we're going to look at another example of finding these intercepts, talk a little bit more about how your answers should be formatted.